Okay, so we have the structure of our pipeline with the stages and the jobs, and we've learned about all these concepts in the GitLab CI/CD. But currently we're just executing these echo commands. We'd simply just print out some message and that's it. So you're probably wondering, what other commands can I run here? So let's see some other examples of commands that you can use here. As I mentioned at the beginning, right here you can actually execute operating system commands. So if this pipeline or these jobs run on a Linux server, which they do in our case, then you would simply write Linux commands here. So for example, in the run unit tests before script section, we want to print out and see what is the directory where this is being executed. So that's a pwd, a simple Linux command. Let's do ls to print out the contents of the current folder. Let's create a new directory called test data. And again, print out the contents. And let's say after script, let's run some other Linux commands. For example, since in the before script we're creating this test data, let's actually clean this up and remove it in the after script section. And then again, let's display the current directory contents. So basically we're giving the script a bunch of Linux commands to execute. So let's try this out. I'm gonna commit the changes. Let's check the run unit test logs, and here are our commands. First we have the echo command, then we have the pwd which got executed, and we're seeing that this is the current directory where GitLab is executing our job. It's /builds/ my GitLab username and the project name, and inside that we have our projects files, the application code basically. Here we are creating test data, so that gets added to that folder content, and at the end we are removing that test data so that folder doesn't exist anymore. So this is how you can execute other Linux commands inside the script section for all your jobs. And again, in our case, GitLab executes all these jobs on a Linux environment. That's why we can use Linux commands. But we're going to learn about the job execution environment and where these jobs actually get executed on which environments in a later section. So for now, it's enough to know that you can execute various Linux commands in your jobs. It could be that you have more complex logic that you want to execute in your jobs. So you have a more complex script. Again, as I said, maybe you're preparing some test data, maybe you're connecting to some server, making some HTTP calls, etc. So you may actually have more complex logic and 50 lines of script right here. Instead of having the whole script defined inside your pipeline configuration, which will probably make your pipeline code less readable and basically lose the overview of all the jobs and the configuration defined here, you can extract this whole script to a bash script file. So we would take all these Linux commands, go back to the repository, and add a bash script file here. Let's actually call it something like prepare tests.sh. So it's a shell script. And we just list those commands directly here. So just a standard bash script as you would write it. And save this. So now we have this prepare test.sh file available. Going back to the editor, now we can remove those commands and instead reference the script file. Super easy. So prepare test.sh will be executed here. That's why we have // because we want to execute this file. However, before we can execute, we want to make this shell script executable. So we need one more command that gives us an execute permission on that file. And we can do that simply by changing the mode of the file, adding execute permission. That's what X stands for. So we are adding that X or execute permission like this. And once we have that execute permission, we can actually execute that script. So again, you can have hundreds of lines of code here, and with this configuration, it makes it much more cleaner to write your pipeline. So you have all that logic in a separate file. And let's actually commit those changes and let's see that it works. And you see tests are being executed in parallel. Let's switch to the stage view. And you see those commands here. So prepare tests file became executable, then we're executing it here. That shows us the output of the commands defined inside and so on. Now here I want to note one interesting thing, which is that in GitLab CI/CD, every time we execute a pipeline, it executes it on a fresh new environment. So we won't even have to clean up the test data directory or any temporary files that were created on that environment at the end. And we won't have to worry about executing this make directory test data multiple times. Because usually when you try to create a directory that already exists, you get an error. In our case, we can run it 10 times. It works without an issue because the pipeline always gets executed on a fresh new server, fresh new environment, which is a great thing because we always get the same result when our pipeline runs because it doesn't depend on a previous state. And with that, let's actually clean up some of this logic. Let's remove this part right here, as well as the cleanup. And let's also remove our script file.